Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Dr. Naledi Pandor, has made two interventions at the UN Security Council this week. First on the Palestinian question, and then earlier today on the Women, Peace and Security file. She is my guest this afternoon. Minister, good to see you. Welcome back to New York.
Thank you very much, and good day to you.
So in the council earlier today, you said that the Women, Peace and Security agenda is under threat through the proliferation of conflicts around the world. You mentioned the current Palestinian-Israeli conflict in the Middle East. You touched on conflicts in Africa. You mentioned Ukraine. Are we losing this battle?
Well, I think the Security Council really has to marshal its best efforts at ensuring a unified voice that directs the world's attention to solutions to these crises. I have a sense from participating in the two debates that we still find a UN Security Council that's quite divided and that has been unable to find a united voice on these important issues. I had the opportunity to speak to the United States ambassador, and I understand they'll be presenting a resolution sometime today, as will Russia. And I was saying, I think really we need a synthesis, because there is so much conflict that it's only through this multilateral institution that a unified voice can emerge, which will give a sense of hope that we can overcome the most difficult problems.
I'm going to talk about those geopolitical divides and these competing resolutions in a minute. You said in the council yesterday, Minister, that we must work through the UN to create two states. And yet we often hear that there is no substitute for direct negotiations. In fact, the Israelis and the Americans will say that it cannot happen in the Security Council. It cannot happen at the UN. It must happen directly between the parties to this conflict. Is the UN still viable in terms of this process that hasn't really delivered over so many decades?
Well, you know, Sherwin, let me say that I believe the United Nations, particularly the Secretary General, has enhanced the legitimacy of this institution in the past months in really, articulating the key priorities that the UN should focus upon, and in being front and center where there are crises, most especially in this current crisis between Israel and the Gaza. So I believe that the United Nations continues to have currency and is an institution that can play a role in drawing parties together. The solution won't be found in the UN as an institution, but the UN should be playing a leading role in its using its ability to draw parties, countries, individuals together. This is what we meant.
Minister, some would argue that Washington, for example, has played a more meaningful role in terms of those direct negotiations between the Israelis and Palestinians, and yet you see a lot of division around the continued role of the United States. Does the United States still enjoy South Africa's full confidence as a mediator in this conflict?
I think the United Nations is an important body. As to the United States and its particular role, the United States has taken a specific position with respect to Israel. There hasn't been much reference in the discourse of the United States reference to Palestinians. It's been much more about Israel. What you need is an institution and individuals and leaders who haven't taken a particular position that draws countries apart, but that is able to bring people together. And I believe that the Secretary General and the United Nations body could be that institution.
Minister, you mentioned the two competing council resolutions, one from the United States on humanitarian pauses, one from Russia calling for an immediate ceasefire. You yesterday joined urgent calls for what you said was an immediate, comprehensive ceasefire. So I'm guessing you're leaning towards the Russian resolution in
I'm
this
leaning
instance.
toward a ceasefire. I'm against
Well, the United States is not proposing that.
Well, then I think their resolution should not enjoy a sway with member states, because when you say pause, what do you mean? You start bombarding again a day later? I think we need to bring this conflict to an end. The suffering has been immense, and what we should all be working at is finding the hostages, getting them released by Hamas, and stopping the killing.
The United States is basically affirming in that resolution, calling for humanitarian pauses, Israel's right to self-defense. What do you make of that argument?
I worry about that notion because, again, context is being amended to suit a particular argument. We're aware that the people of Palestine have suffered great harm over many years of settler occupation, denial of rights, denial of freedom, denial of territory, denial of sovereignty. So there's a terrible context that we have to speak to. So it can't just be a matter of defense. There's also an obligation as an occupying state, as we mentioned in our statement yesterday. So it's not just a matter that you have a right to shoot at people, you also have a right to protect the innocent. And what we've seen is the death of many innocents.
Yeah, Minister, also in the council yesterday, you said that the conflict has again illustrated the inadequacy of our organization, the United Nations, and particularly the UN Security Council. It has clearly not been able to, over time, prevent conflicts from spiraling into intense violence and harm to ordinary citizens. All of us need to work harder at reforming our organization so that it's more capable at responding and protecting civilians. My question to you is, in terms of those reform discussions, the Eswatini consensus is very clear that any new permanent seats, including 2 for Africa, should include the veto. Is the veto not the problem here?
I'm not here to change the decision of the African member states of the African Union, so the Eswatini consensus stands as is at present. But the reform I'm speaking of is not merely the Security Council. If you read beyond the Security Council reform, you would have noted that what I said is that the UN needs to look broader at capacity to protect, because what's happening, we're all observing while people are being mowed down. Surely this shouldn't be how we are as a global community. And what we need to look at is can we establish through the UN, where all the world is gathered, a mechanism, be it soldiers, a peace force, I don't know what it might be, but that would be there as a shield for the innocent.
But let me give you
so that they're not harmed.
Let me give you one practical example. There was a resolution put forward by the Brazilians calling for humanitarian pauses, among other things. It had 12 council members in support, 2 abstentions from the UK and Russia, and the United States vetoed it, scuppering the entire thing. That's why I ask you again, is the veto not problematic?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is one of the reasons why the reform needs to be inclusive of how decisions are made and where the final decisions are taken. At the moment, you have a use of the General Assembly to almost overturn what would come out of the Security Council when there are instances of a veto. The General Assembly can vote for or against the resolution and is taken as adopted. Should we be moving to that kind of more democratic inclusion? I don't know.
I would just say
these
that
are deliberations we should have.
General Assembly resolutions are not legally binding. They don't have the same power. So that system would need to be looked at as well.
Sherwin, it's very kind to say that there's power because people are dying. Clearly, you need much more power than what exists through a legally passed resolution. You need to be able to act to protect.
Minister, your call with the Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh after the October 7th attacks has not gone down well in certain quarters. The SA Jewish Board of Deputies in a statement quoted the fundamental principles of the Hamas Charter. It says the destruction of Jews and the Jewish state. Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it. There is no solution to the Palestinian problem except jihad. In retrospect, Minister, was it a wise decision to have that call?
Well, as you know, South Africa is always dedicated to finding solutions and to promoting peace. When the Hamas leadership asked to speak to me, I agreed. And I conveyed the wish of South Africa that there be peace. This is my responsibility to do. When the apartheid state wanted to speak to our leaders, we didn't say they've been harming us, they've imprisoned our fathers and grandfathers. We said, let's talk. This is the South African character.
Is the rocket fire from Hamas that continues to this day, is this problematic in terms of where we need to move here?
Rocket fire toward?
Toward Israel. from Gaza?
I think both nations have to really look at finding a way to peace. We've made this very clear. So I'm not in the business of attaching blame to one or the other. I'm thinking more about the men, the women, and the children who are being murdered every day. And that is what all of us should be paying attention to.
Minister, final question. In certain South African quarters, calls for the Israeli ambassador to be expelled, for the Israeli embassy in Pretoria to be shut down. What is your analysis of those calls? What is the estimation? Is there a red line? What does it take for, in lieu of a decision of that nature?
Well, I think when you're faced with very difficult situations, one of the important things is to always maintain maturity and balance. And, very quick reactions which appear radical but don't solve a problem are not good decisions to make. So I have said before to colleagues who've raised this with me, tell me what would happen in 24 or 48 hours after such a decision is made. Will there be peace? Will the Palestinian people enjoy freedom and justice? I suspect we need to do more than the closing of embassies, and that's what I'm looking toward.
Minister, we appreciate your time as always. Thank you so very much indeed.
Thank you.
Dr. Naledi Pandor is South Africa's Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, in conversation with us on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and, of course, 2 key Security Council resolutions being put to a vote on the humanitarian file in that regard in just a few hours.